Welcome everyone to today's webinar as part of the Professional and Leadership webinar series. The webinar title today is Teaching 101, Preparation and Resources for Instructors and Assistant Professors. I welcome everyone and also want to introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Aguilera. I am the Professional and Leadership Programs Manager at SACNAS. And then we also have Emily Pavlik, who's Coordinator 2 at SACNAS, who's actually moderating the chat. SACNAS is an inclusive organization dedicated to achieving true diversity in STEM. As the nation's largest multicultural and multidisciplinary STEM diversity organization, SACNAS creates a space where all members, volunteers, and partners feel that they belong and can embrace their intersectional identities. SACNAS is based out of California, which is the original homelands to over 200 tribal nations, bands, and rancherias of Native American and Indigenous people. We would like to take this time to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the various regions which we all live and work, and honor the rich culture of the Indigenous people across the country. It is our pleasure to coordinate and host these informative webinars. As a friendly reminder, please feel free to submit all of your questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom. Please be mindful and respectful in the chat, and feel free to share with the audience who you are and where you're zooming in from today. And now, without further ado, I am very fortunate to introduce our two amazing speakers that are joining us for today's webinar. We have JP Dondoria Arias, who is an assistant professor at California State University, Monterey Bay. And we also have Marina Aranda, who is joining as an assistant professor at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Thank you for joining us today. And without further ado, I will allow our speakers to say hello and welcome, and they'll start their presentation.
All right, thank you. So I just want to say thank you all for being here and taking some time before I know life's about to get really hectic here in the next couple of weeks with school starting. So I think I can speak for both myself and JP to say that we are happy to have you here. I hope that you can find this really helpful. I know I'm happy with if anyone has questions throughout. Like, I think we're going to try to give a lot of practical and logistical tips since we know the school is starting in the coming weeks. So if you have any clarifications or anything, feel free to let us know throughout and we'll try to help you.
Yeah, and welcome everybody. I have to shout out to all my cohort LP that's allowed 2023 who are joining us today, and the other members of the SACNAS community. And like Marina mentioned, the idea of this webinar is not for us to tell you what you should be doing, but just sharing part of what we have learned over the years. So some tips that have worked for us, that we have heard that have worked for others, but also this is a conversation. So also please feel free to share your own perspectives in the chat box if you know about additional tools that are helpful.
All right. And that's pretty much going to be our goal for today. So we'll kind of go over some basics of teaching. I don't think that either JP or I have the capability to tell you everything there is about teaching and learning in under an hour, but we're going to try to give some nice logistical tips. And more importantly, we're going to share a lot of resources. Hopefully Liz can share out these slides to the participants. There's a lot of citations and hyperlinks and contact information that I hope will be really useful for you, even if it's not that you're teaching this semester or maybe in your future teaching careers. So yeah, we'll share out everything that we can and what we know in the time that we have.
Right. So just to give you a quick overview of my experience, again, not necessarily because we see ourselves as experts in this topic, but just because we have been in the field for quite a few years, and we have gained some experience and knowledge that we are happy to share here with all of you. My background is in plant agricultural sciences. So I got my bachelor degree in agronomy at the Universidad de Costa Rica, where I was born and where I grew up. And as a first generation student, I thought that was it, and that I have already accomplished more than anybody in my family. So I was pretty settled and done, until I met. So after graduating from UCR, I started working as a farmer, growing produce in back in Costa Rica, and then I had a mentor who actually came to the farm as part, a professor from Iowa State, who actually in some way, in a kind of like telenovela type of story. He with a very broken Spanish, I with a very limited broken English. We were able to communicate, and he introduced me to opportunities in grad school. So I was able to attend Iowa State, got my master's there, then in plant pathology, as well as my PhD in plant pathology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, working with different plant pathogens in association with crops. Then I was awarded a National Science Foundation postdoctoral fellowship that I completed at the University of Minnesota. And then my current position is an assistant professor here at CSUMB. What you would see in these boxes down below is some ideas of or some information of some programs that we have participated, or some experiences that we have gained over the years. And more, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the idea that I want you to get is number one, that this is not a recipe. We are not telling you that these are exactly the programs that you need to complete in order to be successful, but just to highlight some of the tremendous and immense opportunities that you can encounter throughout your career. And so how these programs allow you to craft and shape your career, but also that there is a progression. So you would see that often the sizes of the boxes and the type of responsibilities within each of those boxes grow over time. So don't feel that you have to start from the beginning, right, with all the major accomplishments, right? So you would hear this message later on in the webinar, but it's important to pace yourself and create your own trajectory, your own career pathway, rather than trying to copy or put pressure on yourself that you have to be where others are, because that is only gonna, again, create unnecessary pressure on yourself.
All right. And my career trajectory is, I think, a little bit different from JP's. And I think mine also showcases how I had multiple identity crises and then changed what I was planning on doing with my life at multiple points, which I think is also really indicative of a lot of people's careers. So I went to a really small liberal arts college, Alma College. I got my BS in biology, minored in chemistry. And I think, like a lot of first generation college going students, I thought, well, I want to get out of poverty, and being a doctor sounds cool. It sounds like a great way to make good money. And while I was at my undergrad, I picked up the teaching bug, which, when you go to a small school, they allow like juniors and seniors to TA different labs and different courses, because we just didn't have any graduate students. And when I was doing that, I was like, wow, this is absolutely what I love to do. I want to be teaching. I want to get more involved in teaching. And had this crisis of, well, I guess I don't really want to go to medical school. So if I want to go and be a professor, I was told you need to go get a PhD. So I said, cool, I'm going to go do that. So then I went to Purdue and I got my PhD in molecular signaling and cancer biology. And about halfway through my PhD career, I had just finished my qualifying exams, which for those of you who are either in grad school or have gone through grad school know that is like the hardest part of your PhD, really, is like getting through those exams. And as soon as I was done, I was like, yeah, I don't really want to do this anymore, which made my family really excited when they were like, but you just got through the hardest part. Like, what are you doing? And I just realized that for me, I loved education, and I was talking more with people who were in education and who were teachers, and I just wanted to focus more on teaching. And I found out that there is this entire field where you can study teaching and learning. And I didn't know that existed as an undergrad. I did not know that discipline-based education research existed. So I changed my advisor, changed my thesis, which 3 years into your PhD is not usually when people want to start changing their theses, but I did. And then I started working in K-12. So as a grad student, you know, I did a GRK-12. So I was a middle school science teacher. I was funded through NSF to develop STEM curricula, and then I taught that to teachers. So I did a lot of teacher professional development, going into classrooms, teaching teachers how to teach. And I absolutely loved that. But I realized that all my experience was in K-12. I didn't have a lot of experience in developing undergraduate courses. And I felt like if I wanted to be a professor at a university, I needed to bump that skill up. So I focused, like that was the focus of my postdoctoral career. So I was a postdoctoral fellow at the San Francisco State University in Kimberly Tanner's lab. And that's where I learned most of what I know about undergraduate teaching. Because previously, before this, I was teaching 8th graders, which is so different from teaching, you know, undergrad students. So that was through an HHMI Inclusive Excellence Grant. That's how I was funded. I was able to develop a service learning course, which was really fun. I started doing mentored undergrad research. Instead of just, you know, focusing on my own, I was doing research with undergrads and teaching them how to do research. And that is absolutely how I got my job here at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. So my job here is that I primarily teach Intro Bio, which is a large lecture course. I know that some of you were talking about having some questions about what to do when you teach hundreds of students. So that's what I do here. So I teach Intro Bio. I'm also a program director for the secondary science program, or science education program. So I teach teachers how to teach. I work with science teachers, so I help them get accredited and get their licensure. And then here I also have an HHMI Inclusive Excellence Grant. So all of my research is in the scholarship of teaching and learning, specifically in biology and STEM education courses. And then I was able to do a lot of professional development with faculty as well, because I have this background in teaching both K-12 teachers and then also teaching other faculty on how to teach. So that's a lot of my job here. All right, so I think JP and I, when we were kind of constructing these slides, tried to think of this as like a nice trajectory of like as you're preparing things for the semester. So our first thought is that, well, let's just work on the syllabi, right? Because that should be step one. When you're designing a course brand new, the first thing you want to do is get your syllabi in order, because that is what's going to guide your entire course. So my suggestions for the syllabus is that, and know that you should be able to have these slides available to you later, is that, you know, your syllabus is the first thing that students are going to see when they start communicating with you. You know, usually a week before school starts, a couple days before school starts, you email them, you send them out your syllabus, and this is the first time that they're going to see what kind of person you are. So my suggestion when it comes to that syllabus is make sure you're using really positive language. So when people ask me to go through and think of how to improve their syllabi, a lot of times when I go through it, it's like, you will not do this, you will not do this, you will not do this. Students will only, so think of that from the perspective of a student. If you're hearing someone say that you're not doing this, you're not doing this, you will only do this, it comes forth really infantilizing. So try to use as much positive and active language to communicate what your expectations are to your students. So think about how you can empower your students to be successful in your course, because that's what we all want, right? Think about, especially if you teach freshman courses, you may know about so many resources on campus that they may not know about. Yeah, they share some of those in those like freshman first year classes, but a lot of times it's really overwhelming for students. So I always try to provide as many resources on campus. I say where the health clinic is. I say where the therapy clinics are. You know, where can they go if they're having money concerns? Where can they go for mental health concerns? Think about connecting those campus resources and using your syllabus as a first tool in order to help students have that. I think this is becoming much more popular in the past couple of years, but think about and talk to your departments on whether they have a statement of inclusivity and equity. Some schools are creating their own statements of what, you know, they believe and how they believe in teaching their courses. So just check in with your university to see if they have one of those. And then after you get your syllabus done, I always recommend doing what's called an equity audit. So think of where are you creating barriers and where are you building bridges? So think of students and think, okay, are my deadlines excessively rigid here? Is there any way for me to give flexibility? I teach large lecture courses, so I understand that giving flexibility when you teach 200 people is often very difficult. So think of ways in which you can do that that's not going to overburden you as a professor or as an instructor. Think of how are you expecting students to showcase knowledge? Are they only doing it through exams, or are you thinking of other ways to assess your students, right? So thinking of these multiple forms of knowledge that you can include. So, and then, you know, creating bridges is transforming those barriers, right, into a bridge to help all of your students be successful, especially depending on your student population. If you're in an area where maybe many of your students struggle with home security and not having dealing with homelessness, or maybe dealing with food insecurity, thinking of how much homework assignments you're assigning to your students could be a major barrier to their success in your course. So just thinking about that, if for example you have a lot of students where maybe English is not their first language, how are you providing them ways to demonstrate knowledge that isn't just writing? Because often writing, especially in science, can be really difficult. So, you know, how are you thinking of ways to accommodate those students? Even if it's not a formal accommodation, how can you find ways to help students throughout your class? So that's like the first step when you're working on your syllabi. Perfect. And then the second thing is thinking about your office hours. So one thing that I like to do, and when you teach intro courses, sometimes, you know, like if a student's an intro bio, they're often an intro chem. So you can see when is that class being offered and when are most students taking those labs. Try to take that into consideration when you're setting your office hours. That was a mistake I made my first semester teaching, where I made my office hours the exact same time as the intro chem course. And then I was like, why is no one showing up? And it's because they were all in chemistry. So think about that. I usually take a couple students and I'll look at their schedules online to see what's their typical workload going to look like and how can I make sure that I am available. So having your office hours on multiple days. So especially if this is something that you can accommodate. So instead of just having them on a Tuesday or just on a Monday, doing like a Monday, Tuesday. So that way, depending on if students have those Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes or those Tuesday, Thursday classes, they can find time to accommodate. Also, adding things like by appointment will allow students to know that they can come see you. A suggestion is to rename office hours to student hours and to communicate that on your first day of class as to what the expectation is. A lot of students think that, well, if I don't have a specific question, then I'm wasting your time. And sometimes they don't know what questions to have because they don't know what they don't know. So finding, you know, the expectation of like, hey, if you want to just come and chit chat with me, that's totally fine. If you're not sure what questions you have, I can come up with a list of questions on this material to see if you understand these concepts. And then think of how can you encourage your students to attend. So some suggestions are like during labs, actually have the lab instructor or the TA, whoever, walk them up to the instructor's office. Like, you know, take 5 minutes, especially, well, if it's in the same building. I know some places it's not, but see if you can like do a little field trip to the faculty member's office to see like, oh, look, this is where it's at in case you don't know. Do some low-hanging fruit, give them 5 points extra credit on an exam if they show up to your office hours and ask a question. And say it can be any question, doesn't even have to be class related. But think of how to get your students to attend, especially if you notice after a couple months, like the first month or two, that you're having low attendance. Those are just some suggestions to get more students in. And then like something really silly that I do on the first day of class, I always show this little meme. And I am not a Star Wars fan. I don't watch Star Wars. It's just not my thing. But I find that most students do. So I'll usually be like, oh, do you guys know who this character is? I've never heard of them before, but I think he's really cute. And it's a great way for them to be like, Dr. Aranda, what do you mean you don't know who this person is? And I'll be like, well, tell me everything you know about this cute baby Yoda. And then they'll give me everything that they know about Star Wars. And it's a great way to get people to just start talking to me. The hardest thing is to realize that you can talk to your professor. So if you can give them maybe a little self-deprivation, some low-hanging fruit, because most people have watched The Mandalorian or know of The Mandalorian or know of Star Wars, whatever. It's just an easy trick to get students to realize that you're not scary and that it's easy to talk to people. Okay, and then I would say one of the most important days of teaching is going to be that first day. So I always say introduce yourself and introduce your students. The biggest thing you want to do here is humanize yourself. So I know that on the first day, everyone wants to go through everything that's in the syllabus. They want to go through what's going to be on their exams, what's the structure of this, there is always going to be time for that, right? You send the syllabus out, you can make the assumption that students are going to read portions of it either before or after class. So spend time in that first, especially if you only have 50 minutes, spend time in that first class humanizing yourself. Tell students what is important. You know, how do you want to be called? Share out your pronouns if that's something that you want, you know, to normalize in your classroom. Find a way to humanize yourself. So I always have this nice slide. I share out pictures of my cats and I share out pictures of my tortoise. And then I say fun facts about myself. And I usually try to share out a failure like, oh, well, you may not have known this, but I was on academic probation multiple times in my career. And look it, they still let me teach. You know, so try to find ways to show that you're not this omniscient like person that they can't talk to. Humanizing yourself can be great. And then letting your students learn about each other, especially if you value group work and you want your students to work in groups in classes, give them some time to turn to the person next to them and ask how their day's going. You know, give them an icebreaker. Try to make sure that you find an icebreaker that isn't going to disrupt some cultural norm. And then if you teach large lecture courses, I usually send out a survey before classes start where I'll ask a lot of this information. I'll have students share out what they want in class, but I'll also ask students, you know, share something that can make this a better learning environment for you. And that way it's a personal way for them to say, you know, I get really nervous sometimes, or I don't like being cold called. So that way, if I know that on like day one or maybe day two, I can say, hey, just so y'all know, I'm never going to cold call you in this class. I'm going to give you space to think, and then I'm going to ask for volunteers. So that way it can alleviate some of that anxiety. And if you teach a couple hundred people at a time, having a survey can be a really nice way to get a snapshot from everyone at once. Okay. And then throughout the semester, whatever community you built on day one, you need to actively work on it throughout the semester. It's just like in a relationship, right? You don't just do what you can on the first date, you continue that on for years to come. So make sure you're encouraging with your students. You know, think of your attitude, think of your tone. Sometimes, especially in emails, tone gets misconveyed. So just make sure that you're thinking about those types of things. If you know that a student has a preferred name, try to remember that when they email you. Also, just another thing, and this depending on where you're at, checking nonverbal cues. So I've been in situations where I've had professors be like, oh, you know, this student doesn't ever look me in the eye. And sometimes that's just cultural, you know, whether they, you know, have autism or whether it's just like a different culture. Some cultures do not look people in the eyes. It's considered rude in their culture. So just be mindful of that and be mindful of language, cultural references, slang. Sometimes those cultural references can be in forms of microaggressions. I have some examples here on the screen that you just want to be aware of. You know, often microaggressions are not ill-intentioned. They're said, and a lot of times they just don't realize that they can be construed by someone in a negative way. So, and if you do make a microaggression in class, just apologize for it and move on and be better. So just think of like these types of things throughout the semester as we're moving forward. All right. And then I always recommend trying to diversify your curriculum as much as possible. If you look at most textbooks, you'll find that they are not diverse. So here's just a couple links of what you can use to find different scientists. So you can use scientist spotlights. So here's some different links here. I know that a lot of times textbooks do not have diverse imagery. I think we all can think of times where we did not see people who look like us or who came from our culture, unless you're learning about like Cesar Chavez, right? That's like the token like Hispanic person that people hear about. So think about how you can diversify in a lot of different ways, right? There's a lot of really cool scientists out there. If you go to any of these websites, they'll show you that there's a lot of scientists out there that are really open about maybe mental health struggles that they have, or struggling with things like ADHD that a lot of our students can relate to. And then another thing to consider, especially since this is a science-focused audience, is try to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge. Think of, where is this information that is in these textbooks coming from? And where can we add with knowledge that has already been there, right? For thousands of years, indigenous scholars have all of this like beautiful knowledge, and they talk about these different ways such as storytelling and ways that are really valid as scientists that is never highlighted and featured in most science textbooks. So that isn't, and if it is featured, it's like this additional one pager that's not truly incorporated. So try to think of ways. I always, when I'm constructing a course, I think, okay, for each unit that I have, and usually most courses are 4 to 6 units, I think of what scientists have I featured and what are the characteristics of those scientists. I find it's a good way just to keep myself in check, to make sure I'm not falling into that status quo of only talking about Watson and Crick, right? And not just using Rosalind Franklin as that token woman, to really think about contemporary scientists, modern day scientists, and diverse in different ways scientists. So something to think about throughout the semester as well. Okay, and then since this is science oriented, I wanted to discuss just really briefly about labs and team projects. One of the hardest skills I think we all can agree is working with other people. And often this is an area where a lot of our students struggle because they maybe haven't had, especially post-pandemic, they haven't had as much experience working with other students. So think of, how are you constructing your groups? What structure are you providing to your groups as you have lab groups forming, assigning roles. And then thinking of, so I'm building off a lot of like collaborative learning pedagogy, but thinking of how often are you checking in with your groups to have them self-assessing both themselves and then assessing the group as a whole. I find that a lot of times if students are having issues with each other, those issues they show up after 3 weeks. You don't have to wait to the end of the semester to find out that half of the groups didn't like each other. So just something to consider as we form lab groups or project groups, because I know that's a lot of what we're going to be doing in our classes. Think of, how are you allowing time for group processing and evaluation? That can save you a world of headaches by the end of the semester if you can nip problems in the bud before they become major issues. And also just help students learn how to be adults and how to work with each other and accept that, you're not always going to love your group members, but learning how to work effectively as a team is an important skill. Okay. And I know JP will talk a lot more about kind of these beyond the classroom experiences, so I'll just touch on these. I do find that this cohort of students is very much focused on community involvement. So I always think of, in what ways can I get my class involved in a community? This is my service learning background. I always want to get community involvement. So think of ideas for community outreach. It's a great way to transform your class into something that the students will remember, from years to come. Maybe seeing, are there local conferences that, if you're doing any research in your class, that students can present at? Suggesting, often isolation is one of the hardest things that students struggle with. So can you help facilitate some group meetings outside of class? it can help build a classroom community that is beyond just your classroom, especially for those of us that teach intro STEM students. We're trying to build a community that'll last 4 years. So how can you help construct that community outside the class? Sometimes people need a nudge, and especially if there's a lot of introverts in the room, it can be helpful if you have someone who's saying, hey, you know that this museum is having a free day this Saturday. Here's some suggestions of things that, you know, y'all should go do. Here's an, you know, if you do something like this or something similar, we can give you some extra credit points for it. So try to find ways to help students bond outside of class as well. And then research opportunities. I think a lot of us who have been here know that research is so critical to helping people be successful. So finding ways to structure research in a way that is successful for a lot of people. Remember that maybe you're working with students that work full-time jobs outside of being a full-time student. So think of, you know, are you creating any barriers in your research? Are there ways in which you can create your research program to be flexible to accommodate someone who maybe has a family or who is working? That's just an equity issue. So I think that a lot, especially because I come from a campus that's a commuter school. So I think of how can we do my research at 2 a.m. when my students are up and awake. So thinking of that, how can you scaffold projects to be equitable towards students is just something to consider as well. If you want to be a professor, research is a big component of what you will do. So just thinking of how you can get diverse students in your research program is just an important thing for you to consider.
Right. Thank you, Marina. So as a good segue to the next part of the talk, really is focused on, so we've just heard these amazing tips and recommendations for how to better serve our students. But in this job, especially for all of us who are first generation and really eager to succeed in our first job, we often tend to neglect our needs, because we're so focused on other people's needs that we forget about our own. And remember that these jobs, you're gonna be assessed based on the overall performance. So it is really important to focus on being effective and being a great teacher, but also you are gonna play so many roles, you're gonna wear so many hats that it's important to be aware of all these additional resources and all additional needs. So this is part of, can you go back, sorry. So the foster growth mindset works both for the students, but also for ourselves. Remember, don't try to walk away from this idea that I'm not good at this, I'm not good. She's such a great professor. Oh my God, they are such great instructors. I just suck at this. You know, these are, and don't compare yourself. Remember that everything, just like athletes, you know, nobody was born 100-meter speed racer right away, right? So they have to learn how to walk first, then run, and then become athletes. So the same way that for all of us as instructors, we need to learn how to gain the skills, how to learn the experiences that would make us be more resilient in this field, and how to also we can communicate that information to our students to promote them, to also build this idea of growing mindset that is, rather than focusing on the inherited skills and abilities, to change the framework to everybody is capable of growing into a particular role in a particular profession. Particularly recently, I've been more interested in this field, and I've been learning also about the importance of how the feedback, how the comments that you give to people, even when you're praising your students and even your kids. As a new parent, this is something that I'm really interested, because there is so much information that is now available, and how the effort-based praise really leads to a growing mindset versus something that it's just, oh my God, you're so intelligent. Oh my God, you are the best, right? And we all often tend to go to that kind of language when we are trying to praise somebody, just because it's a more emotional and more, it comes across as a more enthusiastic way to give feedback. But in reality, there are studies that are showing that it could be actually detrimental. So focusing on that effort base, you're doing great, keep trying, keep going. I can see the progress. I can see how hard you're working. This is much beneficial. So some of the, and this was already mentioned, but so with these jobs, there is, for both folks that are in a primarily research institution, as well as folks that are in a primarily undergraduate institution or in a primarily teaching position, there is not enough hours in the day to do it all. And there is not going to be enough, days in a year for you to be able to do it all. So finding ways in which you could be more synergistic and strategic in how do you do things is definitely the way to go. So for all of us who are in a teaching focused position and still are expected to conduct research, which is for all of you who are in a tenure track position, even this is a misconception that if you're in a teaching institution, you only need to do research. You're also still expected to do research, even though you have a much heavy teaching load. Course-based undergraduate research opportunities are great ways to integrate your research questions into your classroom, into your curriculum, and also often, especially at small minority-serving institutions or institutions that are in rural campuses, we often don't have enough space given to individual PIs to conduct, especially bench work. So this idea of conducting your research in the classroom allows you to actually gain access to additional space that otherwise you would not have access to. And there's, of course, opportunities to conduct or allow the students to conduct independent research or independent research internships or capstone courses in which, again, they can contribute to even answer different questions or answer specific questions beyond what you could answer with the entire class in a larger group setting. And these programs or type of projects can lead actually to publishable work, and they are importantly funding programs and even journals that are actually encouraging and seeking this type of work from as a way to also diversify and make more accessible their research enterprise. And not only this is important because it is beneficial for the PI or for the instructor, but there is also ample amount of evidence that shows that they are really great benefits for students in building the scientific identity, self-efficacy, and also career motivation, but also in a good transition into developing this experience in conducting research in a less intimidating way than jumping straight from being in a classroom when you're being told what to do for 4 years and then going to grad school when all of a sudden you're expected to do everything on your own. So the other, all of you are here, so you are already doing this, which is super important. But the idea of keep retooling, the same way that we tell the students to keep learning, keep enrolling. Oh, you should take this at another class. You should take elective classes so you can learn beyond your subject matter. This is also something that when we get these jobs, we kind of like tend to start narrowing down, narrowing, and forget about actually allowing ourselves to keep developing our professional toolbox. So of course, teaching, learning, and assessment, that is part of what we do in a more regular basis. So keep participating in webinars and courses that you could learn beyond, not only how to be effective, but like Marina mentioned, like some of the scholarship work that has been done in these fields. Learning management system, for all of you who have been hired recently or moving from one institution to another one, learning this new, whether it's Canvas or Blackboard or whatever, learning that, it takes a while. It's kind of like switching from an iPhone to Android, right? It's like it changes completely your world, because you're so used to doing things in a way. And there is really not need for you to figure it out on your own. Often there are people on your own campus or people from the companies that offer these programs that are there actually to support and give you the information that you need. Instructional technology, whether it's Zoom, when we are trying to do hybrid teaching or incorporating technology in the classroom, that is also something that there is a lot of resources, and sometimes, again, even tutorials on YouTube that you can look up and are helpful to find. EDI and culture responsive teaching, of course, that is something that is quite important and often neglected, but there are more and more work that is or resources that are available, and even teaching or allowing yourself to understand and learn the tenure and promotion system at your own institution, and the academic and organizational leadership in your institution would allow you also to understand and know where to find things and how to actually make sure that you are fulfilling the expectations. The same way that, like, we started this talk saying you should come up with a syllabus where all the information is there, all the expectations are there for the students, right? The same way we should take the same time to try to understand and find all those resources that are available for us as instructors, but also the expectations in which we would be evaluated based on. And in addition to that, of course, retooling, keep learning, attending conferences, seminars, webinars or workshops on your specific area of research, writing and communications that would also contribute to grantmanship and awards. Often program directors or program officers from funding agencies would actually give webinars on how to be successful or how to write successful grants, which I have found quite helpful. And also how to become, again, a better research mentor, a better project management or manager in new areas of interest. Because again, in grad school, you're gonna be always the expert in your own project, right? But then when you get this job, you're often not even working on the same system, and now all of a sudden you're also expected to know how to run budgets and how to do HR, but also how to do counseling, but also how to do a bunch of other things that you have never been actually trained. So retooling is a great opportunity. So check out for opportunities at your own institution, but also SACNAS, FY, both through the workshops, but also at the national conference, offer really great opportunities to learn about some of these topics. Grant writing, I know this is kind of like the arch enemies for some folks, which you either kind of like love it because it's such a, like, when you get a grant, it's such a like adrenaline rush that you get because you feel like on top of the world, and then you actually realize that you have to do everything that you put in that proposal, and that's when reality really hits. But also it's something that we are all very intimidated because, again, through grad school, most of the time you are being given your a project, or you're not necessarily involved in the process of participating in grant writing, and everything is done by the PI. But all of a sudden, when you get the job, you're expected to now do it all on your own. So this is something that, again, there are specific tools, and really it comes to practice. Keep trying. Start small. Don't expect that you're gonna write your huge, millions of dollars grant right the first month of your job. But also run the ideas by people that you trust and people that are on your side, whether it's at your own institution, mentors elsewhere. But also, the majority of you would have offices that manage grants, whether it's the sponsored programs office or whether they're called in a different way. So those are folks that their whole job is to help faculty to submit those grants. And they are actually staff that are there really to help faculty with those students. And they know the funding programs, the funding agencies the best. So really they are a great source of information. Again, keep trying, look at who and what had got funded in the past. Reach out to people that have funded through that particular program and say, hey, I'm thinking about submitting. If you are comfortable asking for folks who might be willing to share their grants or share their perspectives on how they the approach that they follow to become successful, that is also really helpful. Collaborate with folks that are sometimes having that additional eye on the writing piece or on the project would definitely benefit the outcome of the project. And seek external reviewers. We often, as instructors, we promote students to even give feedback to each other. We are constantly giving students feedback. But when it comes to us, we feel so intimidated about getting feedback, seeking feedback, because when you write something, you feel almost ashamed if somebody is going through, and start editing or finding mistakes. And we have to really change that narrative, because again, the more the more welcoming we are towards getting feedback throughout our entire careers, the easier the job gets, because we really are building on those blocks of partnerships and collaborations that really help you to be better and get better. Again, following the same approach that we have we promote with our students, that we are here just not to tell you that you're bad at something. We are just giving you feedback on something. Then the same way that we should be able to seek out feedback for our own work. Just a couple more things. Strategic planning for success. Learn the institutional culture. Sometimes this is something that this is kind of like the hidden curriculum for that. Sometimes our students don't know so many things. The same way that when you get the job, there are so many things that you don't know about the institution, how you should communicate, who is really this, what is the culture in, whether there is some past, story on why things are done in a certain way, but also identify those agents of change, whether it's in your department, and if you are in a department that is not really supported, find your allies elsewhere. Understanding, participate in shared governance. This comes kind of like, take that with a grain of salt, because it really helps to attend and be involved in departmental meetings, Senate meetings, when the decisions that are being made, the decisions that would affect you. So make sure that you share your opinions, because definitely, especially for all of us in this room, we need diverse voices. We need diverse perspectives at the decision-making table in order to promote change and progress, right? But at the same time, take this, again, be cautious to not try to fix everything, or don't have this idea that you have to commit to do everything, because otherwise you're gonna burn out. Identify and learn what is how to handle the bureaucratic burdens. Whether it's filling out forms for travel purposes, whether it's for grants, whether it's for teaching, how to reserve a room, all that kind of stuff that doing it on your own would take so long. But when you actually reach out to staff and people that have done it before, so you can learn it the effective way once, and then it would save you time in the future. Prioritize, try to not, figure out what matters and what doesn't. And then also, again, this idea of share your struggles and share your accomplishments and what has worked with you, but also your struggles, because it's often so not only therapeutic to talk about what is not working and how things are not working for you, but also often you are going to find somebody who said the same happened to me, and this is how I was able to overcome that. So balancing competing demands, be organized, of course, make sure that you document everything and set up attainable goals. Don't try to be, ready to submit your tenure package on the first year of your on the position. So keep in mind that this is not that there is progression, that and you're expected to progress and work towards those goals. Find your own work-life balance, whatever that means for you. You need to be able to say yes to things, but also you need to say no to other things, and learning when to say yes and when to say no is one of the most important things in this job. Delegate tasks and work collaborative with others, and make sure that you also are enjoying your job, because if you are really burned out and feeling miserable, then that is also going to come across in the rest in your performance. March at your own drummer. And this is again going back to the idea that what we are sharing here is not necessarily for you to, you have to feel that you have to do exactly everything that we are telling you to do or be where we are, but instead, right, draft or craft your own story, your own pathway, and make sure that you don't compare yourself and put pressure on you, but instead find what are the things that work for you, where are the areas that you need more work, and work towards them, and build your tribe of peers and mentors and role models, because really they are the ones that would cheer you all the way to the finish line. But also ask for help. Do not hesitate to ask for help, because asking for help is actually not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. And last but not least, so just words of encouragement. See failure as a growing opportunity and learn to get back up. If you get terrible evaluations at the end of the course, don't feel that they're gonna fire you right away. Learn how to address those things and take that in consideration. I mean, consider that feedback and learn how to, process that feedback in a way that is not only emotional, but it's actually more productive, in a way that you could actually incorporate it in how to become more effective. Review, reflect, revise, and improve all your materials, whether it is a course material, whether it's your syllabus, whether it's a lecture, a seminar talk that you give, a grant that you submit. So there's always way or opportunities for improvement. Pace yourself. This job is a marathon. It's not a sprint, so do not burn yourself the first semester or the first year. Be realistic of opportunities and limitations, and work towards strategically based on those. Be creative and resourceful. Find your community, because really this is fundamental, and really build collaborations with your colleagues, so you feel that you're in a place that supports you, but also in your community, whether that community of stakeholders is people in the community or people within our SACNAS community, for example. And then we are going to share some resources at the end that would be in the PowerPoint presentation. So that's all what we got at this point. Feel free to reach out to us. These are our emails, but also I'm sure that Elizabeth can share that information if you want.
Yes, thank you. And actually, we are going to be sharing that in the chat. But I just want to say really quickly, thank you so much for all of that amazing wisdom. We do have a couple questions in the chat that I'm hoping we can get through. I know we're almost at time. The first one I wanted to ask, just because this is a day one question, what are some good icebreaker games for the first day of class? This was asked by Luis.
Yeah, I always caution people to make sure that whatever icebreaker they share doesn't allow students to trauma dump on other students. So I've seen like 2 truths and a lie go very hairy on a first day. And the next thing you know, you have people crying. That is not the vibes you want to start your first day with. So I usually Google what are silly questions that I think are not going to offend anyone. So the one that I usually share is, would you rather give up caffeine or meat for the rest of your life? And then I say like, oh, like I want to know like, who are my caffeine lovers? And then we talk about like, oh, what's your favorite coffee? Or do you like tea? Do you like pop? Or soda for those of you who are not in the Midwest? Or if it's like, oh my gosh, like you're like a meat and potatoes person. What's, so it's like, it's something, it doesn't incite any trauma. It's something simple, but it also it's giving someone a prompt so they can chit chat and talk. So I always just Google silly icebreaker prompts, and I always just make sure that you're not just take into consideration that you're not going to offend someone's culture with whatever prompt you choose.
One that I have used in the past and so far has not created any or led to any drama or issues. I hope it doesn't happen in the future. But what I like is to actually, when the students are in groups, ask them to find within the group something common among themselves. And you leave it completely open. So some of them would go for the obvious. Oh, we're all male, we're all female, we are all brown, we are all black, or whatever. But then also in some cases, it could lead to, all of us are first generation, all of us are immigrant, all of us are wearing tennis shoes, all of us have iPhones. It's a way to really find and highlight at the end of the activity that there wasn't a right or wrong answer, right? All of them were able to identify that commonality. And more importantly, that as a community, you can always find something in common with other people. So it's a way to kind of like start on a positive note from the beginning.
Wonderful. I really like that one, and I'm definitely going to use it in the future. We have a couple questions actually from Felix. The first one is, based on the different learning styles of students, what is the teaching approach that has worked best for you?
I think it's a hard question because there's so many teaching approaches. I would say, like, at a base level, I use a scientific teaching method, which is essentially like sciencing up your teaching. So collecting evidence from students and using that as feedback to shift or change what you're teaching. So there's a lot of different teaching philosophies out there, and I usually I use a lot of evidence in my teaching and gathering evidence from students. I also try to be really culturally responsive in my teaching as well. So that, a lot of people would, other people would suggest like looking up like inquiry teaching, like a 5E method. That's another great one. That's usually the one I use or like suggest that my like high school and middle school teachers use. So there's a lot of great ones. And I think the most important thing is figure out what works for you, right? Because whatever one is helping you be successful, because if you feel like you're doing a great job, that's going to translate to your students.
And I would say that have this conversation with the student. So if somebody brings up that, for example, I don't want to be called out in class because I get too nervous. I don't want to participate in person. So then a way to actually not only tell, okay, so this is what I'm going to do is, how would you like me to actually assess or engage your participation? Mm-hmm. Would you like to respond, provide a written document, or would you like to participate in a forum discussion on Canvas, or what? That way, the student would feel engaged, and they would feel that their perspective is validated. But at the same time, that would also allow you to, find out when, like sometimes you have those like sneaky students that are just trying to trick you, especially as a new professor, right? So make sure that when you actually ask them for what they would like to, what is the learning style? If that that teaching approach doesn't work for them, how would they be benefited, or what is the style that would benefit them the most? And that also give them a little bit of more involvement and engagement and kind of like a buy-in into what exactly their learning process, because it's not only unidirectional, so it's not only you going toward them, but it's actually multi-directional.
Yeah, I really like also what Marina had mentioned before about doing kind of like a pre-survey, and then that way exactly what to expect and right. Sort of cater right to the students. So that kind of actually answered these other two questions from Felix and Lila. We have a question from Stephanie. What are good strategies to make the class environment more inclusive to all diversity, especially in a small group class of highly diverse students?
So something, for example, that going back, I think that the survey is a great way to number one, gather the needs and expectations of the students, but also going through that exercise at the beginning of everybody sharing who they are, what is important for them, and what are they looking forward. So as a member of the LGBTQ community, I share a picture of my husband, myself, and our son in the first class. In that, I have found that also is very helpful, because that also set the bar for other students who want to feel comfortable sharing their identity. I always say I'm an immigrant, and I tell the students I have an accent and I am in front of the classroom. You should not be intimidated to participate in class if you have an accent or if English is not your first language. So kind of like Marina mentioned in her slide, making yourself more human, more accessible would also make the environment more inclusive.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's getting to know your students, because diversity can mean so many things, right? So getting to know your students, and then from there being able to think of, okay, how can I like teach them equitably? And sometimes that requires having a conversation with someone and saying, you know, what do you think would work best for you, so that way you can be successful here. Right. And then trying to find ways to incorporate those suggestions, especially in those small group activities. If you can, like, try to be really purposeful in how those groups are formed, and making sure that you don't put 3 white males with a female person of color. Sometimes it can be really intimidating. So trying to like just take into these ideas group dynamics, and then I would say trying to add as much structure as you can. It will just make groups work effectively to begin with, but also can help those groups work more equitably as well.
The other thing very quickly is that often we come up with these very clever icebreakers on day 1. And by day 2, it's like, forget it. Like, we are already a community, move on into business, right? But remember that actually building that community, building that inclusion, it actually takes time and effort. So throwing another icebreaker in the middle of the semester, week 2, week 4, whatever, it helps to, again, kind of like build that sense of community.
Yeah, and building time for feedback from students. I usually at after the end of week 1, I do an exit ticket where I say, okay, what's working, what's not, and like let's adjust. And then I do it again in week 4, and then I do it again in week 8. And I constantly tell my students that you don't have to put your name on it, it's completely anonymous. This is just a way for me to get feedback as your instructor. So I think that's, you have to think about like, what are things that you can do, and getting as much information from your students is just the best thing that you can.
Perfect. Well, I know we're a little over time, so I do encourage our participants or our audience to maybe direct some of those questions that weren't answered to JP and Marina. If you check the chat, we did drop their email addresses, and I'm sure they would love to get in contact with you and answer those questions. With that, I do just want to briefly let everyone know that we do want to hear from you. At the end of this webinar, you will be prompted to take a short survey, and that way you will let us know how it went, and you'll be able to provide your feedback and suggestions for future webinars. And then also, I invite you to stay informed about the opportunities that SACNAS has, as well as how you can register for our 50th anniversary 2023 National Diversity in STEM Conference at www.sacnas.org. I want to thank you so much to Marina and JP for joining us today. I'm very excited for all of the information that you've shared, that it will be incredibly helpful to our audience and beyond. And with that, I say thank you to everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.